Hi, my name is Ben Atkinson, and welcome to Season 2 of the Functional Health Podcast. I'm trained in both biomedical science and nutrition, and I firmly believe that a holistic and functional approach to health is fundamental to our well-being. I interview some of the leading voices in nutrition and lifestyle medicine, from practitioners to professors and everyone in between. With this podcast, I will share with you their stories, their expertise, and their advice, shedding light on the industry from each of their perspectives and providing you with simple tips and tricks to help improve your health from today. This week, I'm delighted to be speaking with Dr. Rupy Aujla. Rupy is a medical doctor, author, and founder of the Doctor's Kitchen in Culinary Medicine UK. He recently authored the book, Eat to Beat Illness, and I'm so glad to have him on the show and looking forward to diving into the world of culinary medicine. So, without further ado, Rupy, welcome to the show, man.
Hi, Ben. Anytime.
So as a GP with a background in emergency medicine, it seems quite unusual to some people why you would have such a passion for food and cooking. And I know you've spoken previously how your mother was a huge influence on you, but where did your interest in food begin?
I think it was definitely my mum. Growing up as a child in an Indian household, we obviously had a lot of Ayurvedic influences, a lot of spices, but my mum was quite an experimental cook. So we would do Italian food, we would do Sri Lankan food and modern British, we'd even do American food. I remember having, hot dogs and barbecues and that kind of stuff growing up. It was never sort of anything out of bounds. Mm-hmm. And when she got ill, when I was young, that was sort of my first introduction into how food can be used as part of lifestyle change to overcome conditions. And that was kind of like my introduction into wanting to be a medical practitioner, actually. And I went into medical school with sort of the understanding that food and lifestyle play a vital role in the treatment of disease.
Fantastic. So is that where your kind of food as medicine philosophy came from?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. That was my introduction into it when I was young. But as a medical student, that quickly went out the window. Obviously, I enjoyed my time at medical school. I was there for 6 years. I did an intercalated degree in health management as well. I was really lucky to live in a household with other medics and non-medics as well, who just loved food, and we would do cook-ups on the weekend. We would experiment with different spices. I'd spend a lot of money going to restaurants actually and just experimenting with food after being inspired by these guys. And I also grew up actually just watching, being addicted to things like Saturday Kitchen, the Food Channel. Mm-hmm. We would just always be watching or cooking food. And even to this day, when I go home, to hang out with the family at the weekend, where it's always around the kitchen, and we're always cooking. We just have this infatuation with food, and that was sort of my foundations in cooking. I'm not classically trained as a chef, and I would never call myself. People like to call me a chef, but I would never call myself a chef. A chef, a professional executive head chef, is someone who's responsible for doing upwards of 100 covers per night. I'm a home cook at most, and that's how I like to think of myself. But yeah, no, that food has always been a huge part of my life.
It sounds like your student experience was very different of the students which I knew growing up.
Oh yeah.
Just in terms of going out and eating well, and cooking, going out to restaurants, I think is the main difference there.
Yeah, we partied as well. Don't worry, we had some good times. In fact, I was just on a stag last weekend with some of my old uni mates, and it was kind of just living our university days and stuff. It was really good to sort of reminisce, and it was very nostalgic. But yeah, no, I thoroughly enjoyed my time at medical school, and I now see enjoyment in so many other things as well on the basis of that. And Yeah, it's been really fun.
Yeah, sounds like an awesome journey. I know you described yourself as a home cook, but I always think I've described chefs before as the original nutritionists because quite often you need to know how to prepare healthy food in order to incorporate into your life long term. So,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah,
Like I think there's like a Chinese proverb, right, where they categorize the importance of different practitioners. This is like going back like hundreds of years now, and the doctor was actually a level below the chef.
right.
I need to remember, like, I need to try and dig that up where that was, but there's always been this sort of appreciation for the utility of food in health from a very, very early age in terms of our ancient civilizations. And I think, it's almost like we're doing a full circle right now. We're reappreciating not only the advances in scientific research and medicine, but we're also like appreciating just how impactful and just how medicinal food can be.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I thought you were going to say something there.
Oh no, no, go.
Um,
Sorry.
I think you've described your style of cooking as culinary medicine. But what does that mean, culinary medicine, to you?
So, culinary medicine is really a subject that came out of America over 10 years ago now, and it's the process of upskilling health practitioners to be able to have conversations about nutrition at a very basic level and also teaching them how to cook. Because when you're able to cook, you're actually better motivated to be able to have those sort of meaningful conversations with patients in the clinical environment. And culinary medicine is really about making simple changes, simple additions to your diet that will amplify your defenses ever getting ill. So we're trying to reduce the risk of disease by introducing elements of diet that have profound effects on your health and well-being. And it sounds kind of kooky, but actually it's essentially a Mediterranean style diet where we're adding more vegetables to your diet. It's plant focused. It's looking at the quality of your fats as well as things like eating in time. And when you combine that with lifestyle, we have a very powerful package that people should appreciate a lot more. So culinary medicine is sort of like the process by which I think we should be introducing into medical schools and trying to create a new generation of health practitioners that appreciate the benefits of nutrition. But my kind of food is I like to describe it as like a foodie's journey through food and medicine. It's kind of like how we skip through different cuisines, different styles of cooking, but always applying those sort of healthy elements and actually getting people to understand that you don't need to eat a certain way to improve your health. You can eat Chinese style food, you can eat Indian food, you can eat American food, but if you have the right elements of colors, quality fats, lots of fiber, plant focused, we can really protect our health.
Yes, something that you just said there has just made me think. A lot of people and cultures cook meals, and they often cook meals which basically have a basis or a foundation of a carbohydrate like pasta, or with an absence of vegetables, or rely heavily on meat products to provide bulk to their meals. How would you change this current habit, and why would you do so?
I think it's a really good point you make there because I think it's one of the anti-arguments against, the need for having more vegetables or, the need for having an undue focus on quality fats and stuff. In the context of how we've lived over the last few hundred years, we haven't had that much in the way of energy density. So when we're having lots of grains in our food, we're probably only doing it 2 to 3 times a day in the context of someone that's in the fields or walking long distances or burning off that energy. In today's modern environment, we don't do that. We have largely sedentary lifestyles and we largely have energy dense, nutrient poor diets, which are based around carbohydrates. How we've, perhaps you could argue, how we've traditionally eaten over the last few years. This imbalance in terms of how we live our lives and what our food is, has led to a lot of lifestyle-related illnesses, cardiovascular disease, cholesterol imbalances, strokes, dementia, diabetes. There's a whole roster of different conditions. And rather than, just pinpointing it and pointing the finger at diet, we have to also appreciate how our environment has very much changed and our lifestyles have changed. But when we look at how we can adapt our food, we really give ourselves the best chance of protecting ourselves from with these different conditions. I think there's also another element to it as well. A lot of arguments I found from people on the other side of that, well, we haven't changed. We've had the same sort of diets, and back then we had lower instances of cardiovascular disease, and the diet hasn't really changed that much from them. Also, we've probably eaten less in terms of the number of calories, and I'm not a calorie counter, but I think there has to be a lot to say about sub 1,800 calories a day may have to some benefits in the context of people that were moving a lot more as well. So it's almost like, there's a lot of research coming out now with regard to time-restricted feeding or lower calorie diets and how those actually upregulate things like autophagy, reducing inflammation, improving our hormonal balance. There's so many different elements that could be responsible for why we are seeing more disease today and less disease previously. But yeah, I think it's quite a nuanced subject.
Yes, you mentioned autophagy there, and for the listeners, the best way to describe this is almost like house cleaning, but for your cells, to clean up waste products that you produce through normal metabolism.
Exactly, yeah. So autophagy is really the process of self-sacrifice of the cell as a signaling pathway that leads to apoptosis, which is where we essentially remove a cell that has either hit its lifespan or become dysfunctional. And it's a really, really important mechanism that I think we've lost the appreciation for, because we have very binary sort of ways of thinking of things, like our human brain, inflammation is bad or inflammation is good. It's this harmonious sort of balance where we need to get enough inflammation in certain respects and inflammation reduction in the context of our Western lifestyle. So yeah, it's a very mechanism that can be upregulated with things like time-restricted feeding, things like certain types of foods, and things like fasting as well. And I think also, these are very complicated subjects to sort of convey in just sort of principles of eating, and that's why rather than taking the reductionist approach, like, oh, I'm doing this to upregulate my autophagy, or I'm fasting because this is very good at removing senescent cells, the sort of cells that just hang around and release inflammatory signals. I'd rather people just don't worry about it too much, stick to the ways of living that we are sort of evolutionary designed for, and your body will look after itself. But I find it particularly fascinating to look at the research behind how the science is now backing up how a lot of our ancestors have lived, and sort of the things that have come out in ancient medicine to this day. One of which is eating in windows of time.
Yes, and I'm sure fasting would have been a common practice anyway, whether they would like to or not. If hunter-gatherer populations, if they couldn't find anything to forage, or to gather, or didn't find an animal to hunt, I'm sure there'd be periods of fasting quite naturally.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's why we have this like beautifully designed body that is able to withstand long periods of fasting, and why this might actually be upregulating mechanisms that lead to longevity. Whereas if you take this huge, like this body of design that's taken thousands of years to get to this stage, and then you give it essentially food ad libitum, it's no wonder we're seeing more diseases of aging and diseases of chronic disease related to lifestyle in the last 50 years. And that's just one element of it, but I find it absolutely fascinating. And I think, taking that sort of evolutionary perspective is something that, can become quite intuitive to people. What am I meant to be doing at 10 p.m. on a weekday? Am I meant to be snacking in front of the TV and, being stimulated by light? Or am I actually meant to be resting for the day that I've got ahead of me? And although that's not always achievable, particularly, someone who works in the NHS, I'm sometimes working past midnight or early hours in the morning. It's something that I try and aspire to get to. It's interesting because I do a lot of work within the wellness space for the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, and trying to talk to practitioners about how to achieve this. Obviously, it's met with a bit of skepticism, but a lot of positive energy because people just don't know this. People don't understand that when you outside of your natural eating windows, it can be very, very harmful, and it can, in part, explain why we see a greater tendency for shift workers, particularly healthcare workers, to suffer depression, cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes. All the things that we're trying to protect patients from, we're actually at worse risk of. So it's huge sort of ironic imbalance that we have here, and it's about readdressing that.
And I'm sure it's not just food that plays a part in there. Stress has got to be a huge contributor to that. I know doctor shifts are quite typically 13 hours. Is that right? You will obviously know more than I do around this area.
Actually, the worst shift working patterns are those amongst nurses. And I feel so guilty about that because, all the nurses that I work with in A&E, they're generally on 12-hour shift patterns to 13 if you think about getting there half an hour early and probably having to deal with things half an hour afterwards, and yes, they do get an hour break in the middle of the day, but honestly that's just not a great way of like a work-life balance. And doctor shifts can range between 12 hours, but generally they're like 8 to 9 hours depending on like how much extra work you've got. One of my colleagues is an oncologist. Her clinics just routinely go on till 9 p.m. when she started at 7:30. So, it's a very sort of grey, murky area. But actually, after working in A&E in Sydney, where they've got it figured out, I think, better than the NHS. We work 8 to 9 hours. They're busy shifts, but we work 4 days on, 4 days off. And that's sort of like 50-50 balance where you're working really hard for like 4 days, but it's only for like 9 hours at a time, depending on like whether you're doing a night shift or not. And then you have a good 4 days rest where, you can just readjust your balance. You can do stuff during the week. That's, I think, how to deal with the issue of poor health amongst healthcare workers, because we do need to recognize how much stress A, looking after sick people is, but B, the shift patterns are as well. And that's also why I'm so passionate about culinary medicine as well, because it's not just about upskilling healthcare practitioners, so nurses, doctors, allied health professionals to teach patients. It's also about upskilling them to look after themselves. And it's something I spoke about in the first book, the Doctor's Kitchen, because we really need to look after ourselves before we can even entertain looking after other people. Not to suggest that we're not capable if we can't cook a meal or whatever, but purely because it's a very, very stressful vocation to work in.
Just to emphasize what you said, we seem to be on a precipice of a paradigm shift where nutrition is becoming a core part of health and medicine. Is there still some reluctance, though, with your medical colleagues of accepting the importance of nutrition, or do you see everyone accepting it now?
I think the large majority of people in the medical profession are understanding the common sense attitude toward food and medicine. There's some pockets of discontent that I don't really comprehend around people not accepting the medicinal quality or the medicinal label of food. And if you think about what a medicine is a substance that is used to treat or to prevent disease. And if you think about it from that simple definition, food and lifestyle more than qualifies for it to be labeled as something that is medicinal. And when we look at the papers that we've been sitting on for the last 30, 40 years, the Predimed study, the Leonhardt study, the recent one that came out a couple of months ago, 45,000 people on a Mediterranean diet and the incidence of mental health illness, and how that is far reduced. There's a massive reduction in the risk of low mood and depression. There's so many examples in the literature of how simple changes to our diet and our lifestyle can lead to preventative impacts on healthcare. When you look at, I'm sorry to go on a rant here, I'm on my soapbox at the moment.
No problem.
On my milk crate, but like on the side of Hyde Park Corner right now. But like when you look at the chemopreventative effects as well of diet and lifestyle, not to suggest that this is going to radically cure any illness that you have, or it's going to guarantee you that you're never going to, not even medicines can't do. There's no guarantee with a medicine at all, because we're dealing with biological organisms or biology. So there's obviously going to be a randomness to that is completely uncontrollable. But with all this weight of evidence, I find it quite perplexing that there are still pockets of skepticism that don't appreciate the wider message and actually the need to get this across the nation in a responsible and balanced way. You just have to look at I'm going to stop now in a second, but you just have to see the proportion of lifestyle-related disease that is burdening the NHS right now. Well over a third of the entire budget spend, which is over 100 billion per year that the government in the UK spends right now, and how much is preventable. And if you look at the proportion of that spend as well that's spent on GPs and hospitals, which is 60%, and preventative medicine, which is about less than 5%, it's clear that our resources are geared towards being reactive to illness rather than preventative. And prevention is better than any cure. It's something that I've said in the first book, and it's something that I reiterate in the second book, and all the messaging that I put out there in terms of podcasts and collaborations and everything else. We really need to readdress the balance of that and get people becoming more responsible and more aware of just how much power they have with their plates and their bodies and their lifestyle.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And you've named your new book Eat to Beat Illness, or The Doctor's Kitchen, Eat to Beat Illness. Catchy title, by the way. But I'm just going to play devil's advocate slightly here and ask you, do you really think, from what you've just said, that we can eat our way out of our current state of health across, I guess, not only the state of health in the UK, but other Western societies globally?
I think it is probably the most powerful tool that we have in terms of, yes, prevention, but also readdressing the balance of lifestyle-related disease. Mm-hmm. There's enough out there for me to be convinced in terms of anecdotal experience, in terms of population studies, in terms of the novel evidence that we have around how a largely plant-focused diet with addition of lifestyle measures can improve people's well-being on a grand scale. There is enough for me to believe that if we focus our attention on food and lifestyle, we could be looking at a much more healthy population. And I think, in the pursuit of a proactive, healthy population, we really need to get this message out there. I think it's a similar sort of crossroads that we have, that we had with smoking 40, 50 years ago, where we saw massive reductions in smoking habits and an improvement in people's livelihoods thereafter. Really at that sort of crossroads with food at the moment. If you look at the number of takeaways that we have, the number of people who live in low socioeconomic areas that are dominated by takeaways and unhealthy options, that's actually where we need to readjust the balance right now. So it's going to take a coordinated effort between medical professionals appreciating how important it is to bring up nutrition in clinical environments, whilst also relying on the government to make measured sort of mandates on protecting the population from being exposed to things that are going to make us unhealthy. So yeah, what I appreciate, it sounds a little bit left field. It sounds like quite out there. I think we also need to appreciate just how important the message is and how impactful we need to be, because I don't think we've been vocal enough.
Yes, I mean, I have a training in nutritional sciences myself, and I would completely agree with you with everything that you just mentioned. Um, do I think we've been vocal enough? I don't think we're in the kind of mainstream enough for people to really recognize nutrition as a science and the I suppose the scientific evidence which backs up all the benefits it can have on your health. Speaking of which, at the ICANN conference, you mentioned that you were working with the Association for Nutrition to develop nutrition education for doctors. Is that still happening?
Yeah, so the AFN, as you're probably aware, have been granted responsibility by the GMC to improve nutrition training in medical schools, which has been a well-recognized issue for the last probably 10, 15 years. It's been in a ton of white papers. There's loads of people talking about it. There's very little action, unfortunately. So it was May 2018, Leonie Miller, who was the CEO, I don't think she's the CEO of the AFN anymore. I think she's moved on. But they were granted responsibility in coordination with the MSc as well, the Medical Schools Council. So they put together an interprofessional group of representatives from all the different Royal Colleges, so the Royal College of Physicians, Royal College of Psychiatrists, Royal College of GPs, yada yada, including Culinary Medicine UK, which is the non-profit that I founded alongside registered dietitians, doctors, researchers, psychologists, all who have that core vision of improving nutrition training using culinary medicine as a process. So actually teaching doctors how to cook alongside the foundations of clinical nutrition, and NEDPRO as well, the Cambridge organisation. So they've organised a couple of round tables over the last 12 months, really trying to figure out, strategically figure out how to improve nutrition training. So I'm still part of that interprofessional group. We at Culinary Medicine are really focused on the solution. And we're actually holding a hackathon on the 27th of April. Ben, I'd love you to come, by the way. I haven't mentioned it yet, but I'd love for you to be there. It's on a Saturday at Westminster Kingsway, which is the culinary school that we work very closely with. And we're going to go to ground zero and try and figure out exactly what culinary medicine means and exactly what culinary medicine looks like across all medical schools in the UK, because we at CM UK are very, very solutions focused, and that's what we really see as a turnkey solution for the problem of poor nutrition training in amongst medical practitioners. So yeah, that's sort of what I'm focused on right now, is just trying to create a culture that appreciates the medicinal effects of eating well, whilst not overstating the benefits of them as well.
Thank you very much for that. And I am definitely there, by the way.
Great. So looking forward to that. It's great. I'm doing my master's in nutritional medicine at the University of Surrey at the moment as well.
Oh, fantastic.
And they started the masters. It's fairly new, actually. And Professor Margaret Raymond, who's like a world expert on selenium. She always goes on about selenium. And we've got Professor Barbara Fielding. There's a whole bunch of others. I want them to come along as well, because they really created this masters to try and help GPs to appreciate nutritional medicine, and the kind of the context that they're coming with, the sort of ethos they come with is brilliant. So I'd really want them to be there as well, because this is really trying to get that of information in a condensed form across medical schools in the country. And just on a side note, being part of this masters has opened my eyes up even more so to the medicinal effects of eating well. And I say that with a lot of confidence, a lot more confidence that I've gathered over the last couple of years. When I started the YouTube channel and the Doctor's Kitchen and all that kind of stuff, I was really fearful of a backlash against my own colleagues for fear of being called a quack or being cavalier and that kind of stuff. And it took me, a good 4 years before I even gathered the confidence to get in front of the camera in 2015. And now, after gathering even more evidence, looking through the papers even more so, writing 2 books, doing my master's, I'm so comfortable talking about it, because it's true. It's just, it's not my belief anymore. It's scientific fact. And I think we need to get a lot more confident about talking about it these days, because Yeah, doing these. I just did one module on nutrition and aging. And the aging population is a huge. I hate the word burden, but it is a burden on the expense of the NHS, and how much we spend in terms of gerontology, which is the study of aging and how we age. Um, it's minimal, absolutely minimal. We really should be looking at this vulnerable population and trying to improve the quality of life and reduce the morbidity, the years that this population spends over the age of 60 with a chronic disease. And the amount of stuff that we could do with nutrition is mind-boggling when it comes to immunosenescence, cardiovascular disease, protecting against prostate cancer, particularly low-grade prostate cancer, which every male will eventually succumb to if we live long enough, as well as constipation as a big thing. There's so many elements that I think we need to sort of factor into medicine, because we can't just rely on pharmaceuticals, even though they're integral to healthcare.
Yes, absolutely. I think you've touched upon a really important point there. It's that key difference between thriving as you age rather than just surviving. And I think that it's a fine line that needs to be addressed. People are living longer, but not necessarily having the best quality of life, when they could be having a much better quality of life if they just addressed some key lifestyle factors, which you mentioned before.
Totally, yeah. And I think, I think people get in their high horse about it. Like, it's very easy for me to sit here and just say, elderly population, they need to move more, they need to eat more green veggies, they need to eat the bowls and that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Whereas reality, when I'm in my GP practice, I'm not going to be, suggesting that they make one of my Instagram posts. I'm going to be talking to them about if they're having tea and toast, or they're having beans and, cups of tea and stuff. Yes, okay, they're getting some fiber from the beans. That's great. But I might be introducing different sort of foods that they're accessible for them. Do they actually have the taste for certain spices? Do they actually have enough hydration in their diet? Are aware that they should be having more water, particularly as the digestive process slows down with age? Are they aware about the need for them to move a lot more in actually sedentary lifestyles? Or if they nap during the day, they're more likely to disrupt their sleep in the evening. It's all these little tips, these little changes that I think we need to be more sort of adept at introducing to clinical consultations.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't sort of like, a wellness just for the upper classes or those who can afford to be healthy. And that's exactly, I'm sorry to refer to my book so much, but that's exactly why in the first book, I dedicated a whole chapter to how healthy eating shouldn't be a privilege. It's because I'm so passionate about how this needs to be as accessible to people as possible.
Something which I get told quite a lot is people can't afford to eat healthy food. How do you approach people who believe that they can't afford to eat this way?
I think it's a really good point, because socioeconomic status is definitely one of the biggest determinants for for health outcomes. In fact, there was a study that I came across because it was mentioned in one of my lectures about how neighboring boroughs that have different levels of wealth and affluence have different microbiotas.
Wow.
Yeah, so the population of microbes in their gut differ significantly based on their postcode, which is staggering. But obviously, it really does demonstrate, it kind of mirrors the difference in life expectancy from borough to borough in somewhere as diverse as London, and as sort of differentiated in terms of economic status in London. I mean, we literally live on top of each other. In the borough of Kensington and Chelsea, which is one of the richest boroughs in London, you have people living on the breadline, and you have people living in £40 million houses. So it's just huge, stark differences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the whole healthy eating argument for the people who can't afford to be healthy is certainly valid, but I think it does come down to lack of education and the obesogenic environment. If you live in a poorer neighborhood, you're more likely to have takeaways. You're more likely to have cheap food that's being promoted to you as a solution to being poor, rather than one that where we educate people to actually appreciate. You can cook from scratch and you can actually make healthy meals on a budget, but it takes education, it takes food literacy, and it takes culinary confidence. And these are things that we can't, change overnight. And I would doubt very much that my book would be a contributor to that movement. It is everything that I do around the book that I think would contribute to that. So culinary medicine is, yes, one, but also working with more community kitchens and encouraging more GPs to take the Bromley by Bow model or the Michael Dixon model of actually having a community kitchen in the GP surgery. In fact, we did one with Bristol Medical School. The wellness surgery is in Barton on Hill, which is, again, a surgery where there's a lot of social and economic deprivation around it. And they have a community kitchen there where they actually teach the local community how to cook from scratch. So using things like beans, legumes, super cheap, accessible vegetables that are locally grown, using a whole butternut squash or a whole cauliflower that costs, less than 60p, and how far that can go. I know what to do, and I know how to make this sort of food go a long way, but it's about spreading that. It's about educating them to have the same sort of level of knowledge that I have. And that's quite hard to do, and that's something we just got to keep on pushing at.
Yes. Well, was that kitchen that you opened in Bristol, was that in collaboration with NutriTank?
Yeah, so we didn't open it. This is a kitchen that is already part of the Wellness Spring surgery, and we utilised it when we taught culinary medicine for the first time at Bristol Medical School. And NutriTank are a student-led organisation that are campaigning for better nutrition training, and they see culinary medicine, which is the program that we created, as the solution that all medical schools should have in their training. So they've been working very closely with us to try and introduce culinary medicine into all different medical schools around the country. It wasn't in the culinary medicine wasn't with them, but the students that actually started NutriTank were one of the first cohort to actually experience what culinary medicine is, and they loved it. And one of the most special things actually about that whole program is that Professor Trevor Thompson, who really spearheaded getting this as a specialty choice module at Bristol, also introduced the idea of healthy clinics, where the students would have a half an hour to 40-minute appointment with a patient that needed some advice about food for whatever reason. They also got them to go into their own kitchens at home and actually go through the cupboards and talk about healthy swaps or healthy additions, and actually cooked with them in the house. And those experiences as a medical student, even if it's a one-off or a couple of times, it will stay with you throughout your whole medical career. In the same way, my lessons in anatomy in the dissection room has stayed with me to this day. I remember exactly what it was like.
Wow.
And it's that sort of experience that we want to replicate across the country, time and time and again, every year for every cohort. And so we create this new generation of health practitioners that know the value of food. And we're really happy to be working with UCL this year as well, and taking that entire year group of 350 medical students from year 5 at UCL Medical School in London, through a culinary medicine program with Westminster Kingsway as well.
That's wonderful. You can really see the dynamic changing now. Even colleges and universities are more receptive to this.
Totally, yeah. I'm seeing that because we're getting approached from different medical schools. We're getting approached by different London medical schools. Medical schools are doing their own programs, which is great to see. We're not precious about them having to use our sort of materials. And as I said, we're a non-profit. It's just really about giving the new practitioners of health in the future the tools and the knowledge to be able to instigate massive change across the country. And that's what we want to aim for. It's not about egos. It's not about a sensationalist message. It's about, really appreciating what the science is saying, and just utilizing a tool that has been largely ignored for quite a while.
For people and GPs like yourself that may be in a clinic and you only have 10 minutes with patients, what have you found to be the best method for changing the eating habits?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's something that comes up in the discussion at the end of culinary medicine recipe sort of making. And I think that's one of the most sort of the beneficial parts of culinary medicine, because it really does get to the nitty gritty of, all right, this is all good and well, but how do we actually instigate this in the context of a very short consultation? There's a couple of tactics that we've come across. 45-second diet recalls. What do you eat for breakfast, lunch, dinner? What do you drink? What do you snack on? And once you get that sort of little limited bit of information, you're really getting a snapshot of how this person generally eats. On the basis of that, just introducing a small addition to their diet and the information of, if you do this, you may be able to reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease. We know from the studies like Leonhardt study or the Tricopolo, when they looked at the Mediterranean diet score, if you increase someone's Mediterranean diet score by 2 points, you actually reduce their cardiovascular risk by 25%. So that's simple thing.
Significant.
Exactly, yeah. So it's simple things like increasing the portions of legumes per week, or increasing the number of vegetables that you consume, or reducing the amount of red meat or processed meat that you consume, or refined drinks or refined sugars. These simple things, they will stick with people. So it's not about overhauling someone's diet, and certainly not about removing the dietitian or the nutrition professional from the equation. It's about working more collaboratively, because unfortunately in the NHS, we just do not have enough dietitians, and we don't have the means to refer to a proper nutrition professional at every time. So we really have to start the conversation ourselves, and that's essentially what culinary medicine is trying to do, and trying to work within that unfortunate inappropriate model of 10 minutes per patient, which actually gets down to 8 minutes if you're really thinking about it, because by the time you sat the patient down, you've established a bit of rapport, you've gone through 2 or 3 problems that they've always come with because they've been waiting for 3 weeks. That's the issue, unfortunately.
Hopefully that will change, and I completely see where you're going with the culinary medicine movement, and I wish you the very best of luck with it. Rupy, we are unfortunately coming up on time, but I do have a couple more questions left for you. How do you think culinary medicine can be integrated more into healthcare if you had the means of doing so?
I think culinary medicine can be integrated more in healthcare by teaching it, and coming up with just a few key points that all people should be aware of. And I think the first thing is plant focused. So we really need to increase the number of plants that people are having per week, or introducing the concept of more plants the better. But that's not to suggest that everyone should go vegan or vegetarian. It's actually just more plants the better, because we're wholly deficient in micronutrients. I mean, there's a study that came out, I think I referenced it in one of my articles, that considering we have so much access to food in the UK, we don't get enough of our vitamins, which are set at a fairly low accessible level as well. So getting more vegetables in your plates, definitely. I think we probably need to reduce the amount of refined carbohydrates we have in our diet. That is bread, pasta, biscuits, cakes, sweets. That's not to suggest that we need to radically remove them, or you shouldn't ever touch them, but they should be seen as what they are, which are luxury items. And yes, there are certain breads that are better than others that are more whole grain, but I think the majority of people are having the poor stuff, and that's certainly what's reflected in my NHS general practice experience as well. And the other thing I would say is I think stress certainly gathering a lot of attention, and rightly so. Stress is quite a broad term, and I think there are lots of levels of stressors that need to be addressed in perhaps slightly different ways, whether that be reducing technology, improving your social environment, which is a very hard thing to do, improving your relationship with your family, your friends, or even just your work environment as well. All these things lead to psychological and lead to poor health. And I think that's something that won't be we won't be able to address just with food or lifestyle. It's something that takes a lot more wider appreciation. One of my good friends is a training psychiatrist at the moment, and she describes it as, sometimes an upward struggle without the end in sight, because there is so little you can do about someone's social situation that leads to an environment where there's drug taking, or you're exposed to poor health habits, or you're exposed to an environment where you can't get yourself out of the spiral. So, there are so many other determinants of health that we need to appreciate, and I think that's it's going to be tough to address that, but we have to try. There's no point just throwing your hands up in the air and like, well, diet's not the whole thing, so let's not talk about it. So,
I've got one more question for you here, but I think you've pretty much answered it. It said, can you provide the listeners with 3 tips to help improve their health and well-being? But you've gone for increasing plant-based foods in the diet, tackling stress and improving relationships, and also learning how to cook and culinary medicine. I don't know if you've got anything more to add, Rupy, but
I would probably, the last thing I would say is don't underestimate the importance of fibers. I think there's probably a trend going towards low carbing and ketogenic diets, and whilst I appreciate that in certain people, they are very necessary, and they are therapeutic as well, and they're definitely therapeutic means for them. But I think in the long term, carbohydrate restriction that would ultimately restrict your fiber intake and the variety of different fibers that you take into your diet would potentially have a negative impact on your gut microbiota, which is the population of microbes that live largely in your gut, all around your body, but largely in your large intestine. And what we are beginning to understand about this population that is absolutely inseparable from health is that we need to nurture this, and we nurture it with different types of fibers from plants, but also legumes, beans, nuts, seeds, hydration, and stress as well. Actually, all these different things do impact your gut microbes. So I think fiber is something not to forget about.
Thank you. Well, there's 4. Rupy, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really do appreciate it, and I'm so thrilled we finally got the chance to talk together. But before you go, can you please tell the listeners where they can find you and what exciting projects you have coming up?
Great, yeah. So you can find me at thedoctorskitchen.com or doctors_kitchen on social media and Instagram and stuff. The Doctor's Kitchen second book, Eat a Bit Illness, is out at the moment, and the next kind of stuff I'm going to be doing is going to be focused on Culinary Medicine, the non-profit, and some more stuff coming out later on this year that I haven't really figured out yet. So just working away at trying to juggle the NHS job and everything else that I'm doing.
I admire you so much for doing so much. So,
yeah.
Well, I will put everything that we spoke about today and links to Rupy's 2 books in the show notes. Rupy, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I do hope that we can do this again soon.
My pleasure, mate. Anytime.
Thank you for listening to the Functional Health Podcast. You can find links to everything that we talked about today in the show notes. If you have a second, please consider leaving a 5-star rating on iTunes. It really does make a huge difference and helps get this valuable information out and reach more people. Don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date and know whenever I release a new episode. You can connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, or our website, and all questions are welcome. As always, thanks to Joss Aurelia for the editing and Alan Harper for his support.